Morning, everyone. As Rachel said, my name is Chris, and I'm one of the consultants at Synergy Technology. And I'd just like to take you through a quick overview of how forecasts work within Dynamics 365 sales. A little bit of background, forecasts were first introduced by Microsoft in around about 2019. And as you can imagine, they help your organization to predict how much revenue your sales team may generate in a given time frame. And therefore, it can help your organization to plan strategically and ultimately to meet its targets. Forecasts have many benefits across an organization, and different user groups benefit in different ways. For example, salespeople can track their own performance against targets, allowing them to identify potential challenges. Managers can track an individual's sales performance and possibly offer assistance when required. Directors can use forecast trends to anticipate departmental sales and reallocate resources if required. And possibly it could also affect your product strategies, and projections to investors could be manipulated by using projected estimates. I'll take you through how to create a forecast, but before I do that, let's actually look at a forecast that I've already created, and also let's see how that forecast changes depending on who's logged into the system. So currently, you're looking at all the open opportunities in my system, and I'm logged in as a sales manager called Diane. And to access forecasts, if we scroll down and under performance, we've got the forecast button. And this is the forecast that I've already set up. So we can see here, it's a very top level that Diane, as the sales manager, is responsible for these two people. She has a quota or a target of 200,000. And at the moment, her forecast is 150,000. So it's not looking too promising for this quarter. The forecast is made up from the one and what committed opportunities a salesperson has assigned. And we'll take a look at how this can be altered within the opportunity itself. So that forecast of 150 combines the 30,000 with the 120,000. We can also see that the salespeople have allocated nearly 60,000 as best case. They have 65,000 in their pipeline, and for this particular quarter, they've omitted 16,000. That's not to say that they've lost the sale, they just don't think it's going to come in during this quarter. So quite worryingly for Diane, we can see that there's 170,000 gap to the quota or the target. As a sales manager, Diane can now have a look at each of the salespeople to find out how they're performing individually and try and find where these holes are that need plugging fairly quickly. And she can either take a view per salesperson, or potentially she can drill down and see all of the opportunities that makes up Carlos's pipeline. A nice feature is the Kanban view, where you can view all of the opportunities in all of the given stages. And being Kanban, you can then move it across. So now Diane can sit down with Carlos and Alan and actually discover where the vulnerabilities lie this particular quarter. If we change the view, and I'm now logged into exactly the same system, but I'm logged in as the user Carlos, we can see that he can still see the forecast, but because Carlos is just a salesperson, he hasn't got the view that Diane had, and he can't see Alan's forecast either. He can only see his own. Carlos can still drill down and view all the opportunities that make up the forecast, and he can still click on the Kanban view as well. So how does the targets or the revenue get set in these different pots? And quite simply, if we go to a opportunity, so click on an opportunity, obviously depending on how yours is set up, but there is a forecast category, and it's the forecast category which determines where this opportunity revenue appears within the pipeline. Let's log in as someone else, and this time I'm logged in as the system administrator. And bizarrely, the system administrator hasn't actually got access to this forecast. And we'll look at why a little bit later. So that's how forecasts look. And now I want to show you how to configure a forecast. And forecast can be configured in 8 steps. The first thing we need to do is to switch from the Sales Hub and go over to the app settings. We can then scroll down to Performance Management, click on the forecast configuration, and this is where we can set up our forecasts. In order to set up a forecast, you need to be a system administrator or a forecast administrator. Microsoft supplies 3 templates out of the box. We have an organization chart forecast, a product forecast, and a territory forecast. You can also create a forecast completely from scratch. But my advice for the time being, if you're new to this, start off with one of the templates, manipulate the data first, and then once you get more used to it, you can create your own forecast. So I want to show you how I created my sales revenue forecast. So in order to do that, I based it on an organization chart forecast. We start off by giving it a name. And because I've chosen a predefined template, a lot of this information has already been filled in. So the roll-up entity is the main entity where all of the revenue is generated from. So in this case, it's an opportunity. If this was a product template, then the roll-up entity will be based on the product line. Secondly is the hierarchy entity. So this is the record type on which the forecast data is going to be grouped. And again, because I've used the template, it's defaulted to user. And then finally, the roll-up to hierarchy relationship defines the relationship between the roll-up entity and the hierarchy entity. And fortunately, this has already been populated for me, but we can see here that an opportunity has an owner, and then the owner is a user of the system. If you don't find the relationship listed already, you may have to go through the related items in order to link one entity to another. So the only thing really that we need to select for this particular template is what is the top of the hierarchy, or in this instance, who is the top of the hierarchy. And Diane, the sales manager, is top. And then as soon as you type in who's the top of the hierarchy, you'll get a preview on the right-hand side, and then we can see Diane and then the people that she's responsible for. Should also be noted that if we were to look at Alan, I've set Diane as the manager, and obviously the same for Carlos. Maybe this is a big organization. Maybe Diane is the UK sales manager. Maybe Carlos is the manager for Scotland, and he has people working under him. The same principle applies, and it will layer it accordingly. Then we move on to scheduling, and out of the box, the basic scheduling uses the Gregorian calendar, i.e. it uses 12 weeks per quarter. If your business reports differently, then you can turn on the advanced, and then you can change things like the start of the fiscal year, what calendar it uses, and how the quarters are broken down. You can change your forecast periods. You can also decide how many forecast periods you want to see. Once we're done with step 1, we can then move over to step 2. And this is where we are defining who is able to view this forecast and who also can edit the forecast. So the first thing to decide is who's able to view. And it's already used the hierarchy entity in the previous step of user. And now it's going to use user as the owner lookup field. So the owner of the opportunity will then be displayed with the forecast. If you wanted the person who created the opportunity to be able to see the forecast, you could change it maybe to created by, maybe you could change it to the manager or modified by. But this is why when Diane logged in, she could see everybody. And when Carlos logged in, he could only see his forecast. And when the system administrator logged in, he couldn't see it because the system administrator in my system doesn't actually own any opportunities. If we did want the system administrator or indeed any other person to be able to view the forecast, then we have to move down to additional security roles. And by default, no additional security roles have been set. But I could select all security roles can read the forecast, or indeed I can actually specify a specific security role. And if I'd have done one of these two options, the system administrator would have been able to see that forecast. You can also share forecasts as well. Moving on to the next step is where we configure the layout. Fairly self-explanatory. These are all of the fields which are going to be displayed within the forecast. We can click on one of these fields, we can change the name and change various other options as well. It may also be that your calculations are slightly more complicated. So rather than your forecast just being a combination of the won and committed columns, maybe for some reason you want to add a percentage to it. So if we look at how the forecast field is created, we can see that it's a calculated field. And in the calculation box, it supports basic arithmetics. So you can see there it's committed plus 1. But if we wanted to add a 10% margin, then you could also do times 0.1, for example. Once you're happy with the layout, then we can move on to the next step where we can add filters. And there's two different types of filters that we can add. So the first one is the hierarchy filter. So this could be, for example, let's say that, well, let's go back to the example of the UK sales manager. So Diane is responsible for the whole of the UK, but actually she only wants to see a forecast for Scotland. So by using the hierarchy filters, she can ensure that she only sees that data. And it's a similar thing to the roll-up entities as well. Maybe we need to filter out certain companies. So, for example, we know that company ABC Limited has a freeze on spending until the end of the year. So we can actually filter out accounts based on certain information. And then we move on to the next step where we can drill down. So allowing users to drill down on forecasts using different entities such as accounts helps them to understand how the forecast is actually constructed. So for example, when Alan has a forecast of 125,000, but his manager Diane would like to see which accounts make up that 125,000, you can click on that, drill down and see the accounts. So again, we're really giving visibility to both the manager and the salesperson to see exactly how their forecast is progressing. The next stage are snapshots. And unfortunately, it is included in my system. I have to point out that this is a premium feature. And basically what snapshots allow you to do is to freeze a forecast at a particular point in time. And the purpose of that is then you can compare that frozen forecast to how the forecast looks now. So maybe we froze it 10 days ago, and then we can compare it to how it looks today. Whilst on the subject of premium forecasting, just very, very briefly, premium forecasting also consists of forecast predictions. So this is where AI is used, and it looks at historic data and it attempts to predict the future revenue, therefore maximizing potential revenue. Premium forecasting also includes trend charts, so it visualizes how the forecast amount trends over time and compares it against the period end prediction and also the target. And a predicted future revenue line is also created, so you can see how the forecast is going to look into the future. Finally, in the premium features or the premium forecasting, it includes flowcharts. So this provides a visual representation of how the forecast changes between two moments in time. Moving on to the penultimate step. In Advanced, you have various options. So you can auto hide the parent row. So Diane is the user of the system. She's also a manager of the system, but there's no targets allocated to Diane. So rather than her appearing in essence twice, both on the top of the hierarchy and below it, we can just remove it, the parent row. We have other things such as multi-currency selections. So if you have users in different countries, users relate to forecasts and revenue in their own currency. So you can enable that so they can see it in their own currencies. You can also turn on the Kanban view by default if you wanted to. And then the final step is firstly to activate the forecast. So basically, in order to get this spreadsheet, once you've activated it, you'll have the option to download simple data. And that downloads this spreadsheet. It's pre-filled this information, and all I've had to do is fill in the target or the quota information. I haven't set one for Diane because she doesn't have one, but I have set it on the parent level so she's got that quick overview when looking at the forecast. And then quite simply, I've saved that and then I've dragged it into here. And now all the quotas have been set for that forecast. And quite simply, that's how I created the forecast that I originally showed you here.